So earlier this week, we published a new podcast episode from our political editor, Andrew Marr, who spoke about his concern that in today's environment of conspiracy and readily accessible AI, the average informed person can't distinguish between what is real and what's not. And he called this the cloud of unknowing. And this seemed to resonate with quite a lot of our listeners. A lot of them got in touch, and one of them wrote in saying, I believe Andrew's talk today addresses the most urgent in capitals issue for our society and the economy. And the cloud of unknowing is the deadly threat to our quality of discourse and life. I doubt this British government's AI event will address this threat. So the AI event referred to here is the UK government's Global Summit on AI Safety, which has been taking place this week. In fact, it's still ongoing. So we are talking on Thursday morning. More will come out of it in Bletchley Park, which is the sort of home of computing. So, Will, what do we know about what's been coming out of this summit so far?
Well, the big thing to come out of it so far is the Bletchley Declaration, which is an agreement to have a meeting. It's, we've got to the end of the meeting. We've said, look, we're going to have another meeting.
That happens a lot of the New Statesman, actually.
It does.
We should have that convening power.
Yeah, that's to discuss. And that is a much shorter and vaguer document than the one issued by President Biden on Monday, which was an executive order regarding how the US is going to, in its own words, lead the way to global societal, economic and technological progress on AI. So Biden there, to a certain extent, saying, actually, we're in charge, Rishi. But it is impressive, I think, that that they've got all these people together and they've got them to sign something. And I guess necessarily, if you are going to get America and China in the room together and get them to sign something, it will have to be something quite vague at this point. Yeah. Although it sounds quite sort of COP26 in terms of people saying warm words and then going off to do different stuff, it has been addressing AI as this big frontier issue, big issue of safety.
Yeah, and how much, because I remember they brought out a white paper in March and everyone interpreted that as the UK wants to be lighter touch on AI regulation than the EU. The idea was to use our existing regulators rather than sort of introduce new far-reaching legislation, and there was a pro-innovation approach that Sunak was talking about. Has he changed his mind?
Well, he did a remarkable thing over the summer that he convinced journalists that he had changed his mind, I think, because there was that hysteria or panic when those 200 or 300 academics signed that very short letter saying that AI posed an existential threat.
Yes.
And then Number 10 said, actually, no, we are really concerned about this, but I think they just changed the wording on the press release. The actual fundamentals of what they were doing did not change. And I think you saw that again in his speech on Friday, where he essentially said that we should not rush to regulate AI and we should be a pro-innovation country and we should try and attract the AI companies to the UK because they'll face greater regulatory frameworks elsewhere. That's the strategy. Whether that works or not, I think, is an interesting question, and also whether there's a disconnect between trying to have this light touch regulatory approach and also trying to be the world leader in regulation. So Will's completely right. We had this week, Biden set out this very extensive plan to regulate through the executive branch of the US government AI, which is in effect a response to the fact that Congress can't pass much AI legislation at the moment in the way that the EU is doing so. So you've got these two big behemoths who've tried to, who are racing down the line to regulate, and then you've got the UK in the middle, and I think there's a risk of it getting squished between the two. And then also the summit itself has been overshadowed slightly by what the US has done. It's not as if the US announcing an AI safety institute is necessarily a bad thing. The whole point about this summit was to try and energize some regulatory fervor, and that has happened in some respect. And also it's great that they've managed to get the US and China, the EU, to all sign up to cooperate in the future, essentially. And it was very similar to some of the COP communiques that we see come out. But that is it's a low bar, but it's important that it happened. It's also the first of its kind to happen. However, it does make the UK look a little bit as if it's the new Vienna or Geneva, whereby we are just a place that big countries come to carve up the world and we provide the tea and the tables.
And I think you also have to look at who he's invited in terms of whether or not this is a pro-regulatory or light touch summit because his star guest is Elon Musk, who despises regulation. Earlier this month, he tweeted, "Our civilization is being slowly strangled to death, one regulation at a time." His worst enemy is the SEC. He has one of his hobbies is making the words SEC, the letters SEC into various profanities.
Remind the listeners what the SSE is.
It's the Securities and Exchange Commission, who are the people who charged Elon Musk with securities fraud. They're the American financial markets regulator. So he has used the letters SEC to mean various other things, which we won't repeat. So he loathes regulation and isn't really that much of an AI entrepreneur. It makes complete sense to have somebody like Sam Altman there, who's the CEO of OpenAI, which makes ChatGPT, which is the AI that everyone has heard of and probably used. Tesla has said they're going to spend a couple of billion on AI, but that's it's a lot of money, but it's not as much as some banks are spending. It's nothing like, it's about 1% of what Google spent on AI over the last decade. So he's not there as an AI person. He's there as the really high profile AI commentator, and he doesn't like regulation. And arguably people from OpenAI and things like that are there to secure a lighter touch rather than, have Britain be the primary regulator. You can also see it in what we've done with policy already. The steps the government has taken towards, things like GDPR are one of the things they want to do with the UK version of the GDPR is to take out this Article 22, which is the provision, your consumer protections against automated decision making. So that's the bit that says a piece of software isn't going to change how much insurance you pay without explaining why or basing it on things like, personal characteristics that are protected. That's seen by the government so far as being a bit anti-innovation, and we'd like to get rid of that. So it seems like their actions speak louder than their words.
So there is pressure on the government as well from Labour. They announced their AI policy this morning, and they're trying to call for a tougher regulatory approach, which I think is interesting. I think from the political perspective, obviously AI I don't think it's going to dominate between now and the next election, but we had some polling out this week from Survation which basically said that 70% of people would much rather companies go slower and take fewer risks rather than innovate quickly and take risks. That was about 12% of people. So I think where the country is, as with many things, looking for a secure, safe approach to this new technology. I mean, I don't think that's necessarily a surprise when people are insecure economically. We've got international insecurity as well. It's not a surprise that they don't want to run off into the hills with Rishi Sunak and create this AI paradise. So I think Labour's perspective on this is the correct one politically, and it's interesting that they've finally drawn that line quite harshly.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it the last time we were discussing the AI summit when it was coming up, about how there is that sort of squeamishness in the general public about AI because people associate it with two things: robots stealing our jobs and, awful customer service bots that don't get you anywhere. I'm one of the people polled for these kind of polls, and I'm constantly being sent questions like this. So clearly, I don't know who the people are who are commissioning this polling, but clearly that people want to know how the general public feels about it. And at the moment, considering polling like that, there is a skepticism. And it kind of clashes with the sort of right-wing populist, messages that were coming out of Tory conference where tech bosses commented. To me, they were surprised that there was no mention of AI by Rishi Sunak at that conference. And now we see him kind of in his happy place talking about how he wants to innovate.
Yeah, and I mean, I think perhaps people will become still more skeptical of AI if, as Andrew said earlier this week, there is more misinformation or disinformation around, the next general election that is AI generated. Because I think it probably is right to say that it's going to make it a lot easier and cheaper to spread rumours and lies. As we have seen with social media already, and that's one of the things that Sam Altman, the OpenAI head, has said. He expects AI to be capable of superhuman persuasion. I think he is bigging up his company there, and it's very difficult to argue that actually we might all be brainwashed by software because, I think people are more resilient in their minds than that. But if people see a lot of seedy mass attempts, as we saw, that Labour conference audio deep fake of Keir Starmer, then that's only going to make people feel like there's more grubby stuff happening with AI with regard to politics.
Thanks so much for watching. We'd love to know what you think. Please make sure you leave your comments below. And if you enjoyed watching this podcast, you can watch more of our videos on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to like and subscribe.